Good evening and welcome to tonight's competition, Return to Rome competition organisers webinar. We hope you've all had a chance to digest some of the guidance that we've been issuing, but tonight's your chance to kind of ask some questions of our panel. I'm delighted to be joined tonight by Nick Hubble, Chair of the Sport Committee, Clements, Chair of the National Competition Committee, Jeff Elms, our Competition Officer, and also we're delighted to have Bulmer and Julian Egan-Schuttler from Tyne Single Scullers Head to join us today. Just to kind of recap a bit of the context, on the 18th of March, unfortunately, we had to advise that as many the affiliated competitions should be suspended, and that suspension was gradually rolled over until the point where we recently issued some new guidance, which allowed for a timetable of a return to competition, starting off with some intra-club competition and private matches, and we're still scheduled to hopefully move towards affiliated competitions on the 10th of October. Since then as well, we've been lucky to work with the guys at Tyne Scullers Head to deliver a test competition, allowing us to test out some of the guidance, see how things are working, and identify some of the areas where we needed to make some extra guidance available. And that event was a great success and enjoyed by over 100 rowers, so it was great to see people getting back on the water. Off the back of that event, our guidance was updated, and we published version 7 of that guidance last night, and that's available if you haven't seen it at britishrowing.org/coronavirus. So tonight we'll be giving you a chance to ask questions to our panel, and we're going to start by running through some of the ones that have been submitted in advance. But if you do have any as we're going along, you should be able to ask them through the questions panel through the webinar software. I should also just say before we start, we did have one question around insurance. We can't actually advise around the insurance policy, but what we will do is we'll take that question and we'll pass it on to our insurers and ask them that question, and we'll publish that answer alongside the recording of this webinar. So to kick things off, Nick, I wanted to come to you first. It's obviously been a bit of a challenging year so far, but how do you think clubs and competitions have been coping so far?
I'm going to turn myself off mute first, haven't I, again? Sorry. Yeah. Challenging, I think, is one word you could use for it. I can think of dozens of others, but I think clubs have coped really well with it and continue to. They continue to find innovative ways of getting out on the water and getting the maximum number of their members out. Competitions, it's been really difficult for. You know, I think couldn't think actually when the last competition was I went to. I think it was back in February. But I think what we have seen or are seeing now is some great positivity out there from event organisers. With the more guidance that we're putting out there, I think it's good also looking at other sports, what they're doing, because that's what we're trying to pick from as well. And they're, you know, we're working in challenging times, but I think people are getting to grips, and that's really good. I'd like to see people back out racing in a safe way, though.
Excellent. And Phil, coming to you, obviously the chair of the National Competition Committee, completely understandable, but a real shame to see that there's been a lot of competitions cancelled this year. Encouraging though to see though that there's been some good interest in those that have started to advertise ready for that 10th of October date.
Yes, Richard, it is very good. And the ones which are open on Bury at the moment, things like Weybridge and the Pears Head, of course the Tyne Sculls, have all had good size entries, similar to what they've had in the past. Obviously, it's been a bit shame that other competitions have decided to cancel at the moment, but hopefully this webinar will show that actually it's not as hard to run competitions, and hopefully see more before Christmas.
Brilliant. And I guess, Kat, you've been one of those people who's been able to run a competition so far. Congratulations on what sounds like a great event. How did you guys find working with the COVID secure guidance?
It was different. It was good. We managed to make it work, and there's a few extra things to think about, but I think we knew that was going to be the case, so it was just working within the new guidelines, really.
Brilliant. And Julian, you took the role of the COVID-19 officer for that event. How did you find taking on that role?
Yeah, no, it wasn't too bad. I think, you know, when you look at the job description, I think you can easily think this is a bit overwhelming. When you got into it, it was a lot simpler. Definitely just took a lot of common sense at looking at how people will interact during the race and trying to make that as safe as possible. And yeah, it's the same as any other organising committee role in the end. So yeah, it was not too bad, and I don't think people should be afraid of it because it says COVID-19. So yeah, it was good.
Good. Jeff, you're the competitions officer at British Rowing, and the face behind the email address that we put up for inquiries. Have you been seeing quite a few questions come in so far around the guidance?
Yeah, we have a constant flow, and you're right. Yeah, I'm the person, whether you query your ranking points or ask questions about competitions or are struggling to put your results in. If you email, it finishes up with me most of the time, and either I can answer it or I put it to somebody who can answer it. And yeah, we're getting diverse questions. A lot of the stuff that we normally get, we haven't got because there haven't been competitions, but it's starting to wake up a bit now. People are starting to consider the practicalities of what they need to do to live with the new reality.
Cool. So Nick, coming back to you, one of the questions that we had in is quite pertinent with kind of an ever-changing situation at the moment. Clearly, we're seeing more and more local restrictions, talk of potential changes to national guidance. How confident are we at the moment that the guidance from government won't get stricter and rule out competitions?
It'd be good to get the crystal ball out again. I think that it's impossible to say, but what we've seen really in recent weeks where there's been more restrictions brought in is that generally team sport and organised events have sort of been left alone. I think the government recognise the importance of sport and recreation, and that's a key part to it. If there are other restrictions, we are trying to keep on top of every bit of guidance that alters. There's a great team at British Rowing and of staff and volunteers that are working really hard to try and keep stuff up to date. It might not seem that it's coming out as quick as everybody would like. It's perhaps sometimes not as quick as we would like, but we are trying, and we'll keep everybody posted.
Brilliant. And Phil, as chair of the NCC, you obviously oh, sorry, I'm just getting a slight echo there on something. Phil, I was going to say, before we go into the detail about how to make a competition COVID secure, there's obviously a process that competitions need to go through to just get through the kind of basic affiliation process with a few little additions for COVID, around COVID. Could you just run us through those, please?
Yeah, yes, Rich. Really, there's not much different from the normal process in pre-COVID years. All the normal safety paperwork and things need to be done. And the COVID hasn't made us rewrite anything of the safety or risk assessments. It's more additional things. And the two main ones, of course, is the COVID risk assessment and the self-declaration, which is just making sure that you're running it in a secure, COVID secure way. So for normal affiliated competitions, the calendar is still there and everything else. Also, private match side, where you may want to sort of do something on a more local basis. You've obviously got the 4 club rule inside the rules of racing, but you can also apply to the competition committee through a standard form now, asking for more clubs, which is basically asking who you want to invite and how many. And then the competition committee will look at it to see whether it is within the spirit of what a private match is. And that's a fairly quick process. But really, it hasn't changed very much. So it's just a bit more paperwork to do with the COVID side.
Cool. And Jeff, so aside from British Rowing and Regional Rowing Council, who else as a competition organiser would you be looking to liaise with?
I don't believe actually most well-organised competitions will be talking to people the same this year as normal years. So the local authority, the police, local landowners, the water authority, whoever's responsible in your particular stretch. But probably the emphasis is changing a little bit. So this year with the COVID situation, depending on where you are in the country and how serious it is, definitely need to be talking with your local authority if there's any local restrictions in place. Definitely need to be talking with the local police, particularly if there's local restrictions, because spectators is one thing that we really need to work with everybody on. And I would suggest you probably need to be, or definitely need to be, very mindful of the potential impact on your neighbours. So landowners or property owners around where you're going to operate. I mean, you might only be running the competition for a day, but you need to get on with your neighbours forevermore. So, you know, bear in mind the impact it's going to have on them, and take, you know, special efforts to talk to the people that it's going to affect around them. It's not just you it's going to affect, it's them as well.
Excellent. And I mean, we talked a little bit about the changing guidance from government. I mean, Kat, you guys had to deal with changing local restrictions a couple of days before the event. How helpful was it to have those contacts into the local stakeholders for you?
It was invaluable, to be honest. If we hadn't have had such a good relationship and been able to work together to come up with a new plan moving forwards, I don't think the competition would necessarily have happened. Thankfully, we'd given them enough information to start with that they were happy for us to proceed, and we'd kind of worked together in the planning all the way through, and that was really beneficial, especially when the local restrictions came in so close to the event.
Yeah, that must have been one of those difficult moments, waiting to see exactly what the language was going to be around that. And I think one of the key parts of the guidance has kind of been picked up already, is to make sure you've got someone who's staying on top of all of the guidance from British Rowing and from government and others. So Jeff, the COVID-19 officer is a key sort of part of this process. Can you just talk through a little bit what that role entails?
Yeah, certainly, Rich. In principle, it's not dissimilar to if you're the welfare officer or the safety advisor that's at the competition. So the organising committee appoints a COVID officer, and in the same way that the safety advisor needs to make sure they're fully up to date with all the relevant guidance on safety, advise the committee on what that guidance is, and ensure that the committee takes notice of that guidance and implements it. Similarly, with a COVID officer, you need to be making sure you're on top of what the latest guidance is, make sure that information is passed on to the organising committee, make sure the organising committee has a plan on how they're going to enact that guidance and be COVID secure. So it doesn't mean you've got to do everything yourself. It means you're there to make sure that the organising committee has it covered.
Cool. And Julian, you, as we've already said, you took that on at the Tyne Single Scullers Head. What sort of things did you find yourself up to on the day?
So yeah, a few different things. I'll give you some examples, and also I'll kind of start with some stuff I did the evening before, because it relates to on the day. So we had a track and trace form that competitors and volunteers and also sculler support for rowers had to fill out. So the evening before, I just went through the draw and went through our form submissions and made sure that everyone had filled it out, and then made a list for all the different sites so people couldn't get their bound numbers before they'd filled out the form. So they then had to get out their phone on the day and do it right then if they hadn't already. Yeah, obviously noted who the sculler support people were, so we didn't have random people walking down and helping out. Then on the day, it was basically just kind of keeping an eye on things and seeing how people were interacting, and just making sure the precautions that we had in our plans and risk assessments were being followed. So one example is, I think it was in the second division, when the scullers were coming back in, the tide was quite low, and basically all the scullers needed help to get off the water because of the mud they were launching in. So then it was a case of going around all the volunteers and getting on the radios, whatever, and giving them either more PPE because they'd have to help people with their boats, and also just reminding them about washing hands, etc., after helping scullers. We also had another moment where a sculler had to be brought back in by the safety launches, and then when that happened, that was a case of getting on a radio and just reminding everyone to have their PPE on and just be sensible and follow the guidance. I mean, because we provided all that stuff to all the volunteers, so they had it, that wasn't an issue. So yeah, it was just kind of standing back, looking at things and just using common sense as well. Yeah, it was good.
Excellent. And did you generally find that like coaches and competitors were pretty happy following the instructions that you're giving them?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, coaches and competitors were great. Same with the volunteers as well. I think with it being that first event, the first competition since lockdown, I think everyone was really invested in making it go well, so there could be more competitions. And yeah, people were great with it. And I think, we made it very, very clear in our competitors' instructions that if they hadn't filled out the track and trace form, or if they weren't following the rules set out in our risk assessments and paperwork, that their entry would be scratched. We were trying to be very, very, on top of that. So I think with that kind of stick there, they definitely, stuck with it, and it was overall, I think, an excellent event of watching people stick by the rules.
Excellent. Yeah, I guess there's always that kind of carrot and stick mix is always good. Nick, on the COVID officer, like, have you got any tips of kind of how to potentially recruit for that position? Like, what sort of person, and could it be combined with other roles on the organising committee potentially?
As far as combining the role first, we have said in the guidance and in the job description that ideally it should be a standalone position. That's only really because it's a new position. It's, if we cast our minds back to when we first brought in event safety advisors or welfare officers, that was a similar thing then. It's a role that everybody, like other roles, of course, everybody has to take really seriously. I don't see that there's, hopefully we won't need a COVID officer forevermore. So it may well be that you've got somebody on your OC that, is really diligent, is really proactive, and it may be that you need to perhaps swap them out of being, I don't know, head of sandwiches and become the COVID-19 officer for this season. That, I think, and it acts as a check and balance. So as we've intimated before, that this role isn't about that officer doing all of the work. It's about making sure that process is put in place, and it's about questioning. So if the race committee chairman decides that that they need to alter their competitor instructions in some way, it's about that person, that COVID officer, then checking, and actually, that's a really good move, that works. It's not difficult to do that. You've come up with a brilliant idea. That's what it's about.
Yeah, and ultimately not that one person isn't taking overall responsibility. It's still an organising committee collective.
Yeah, it's still very much the organising committee that are in charge of the event.
Cool. So moving on. Oh, sorry, go on.
I say also, Rich, one question that's often been asked is, why is it an officer, not an advisor? Well, because we've used the name officer because that's how it's used in all the governmental documentation to do with this. It's very much like our safety advisor advising the rest of the committee on what to do with the COVID stuff.
So it's more about consistency of language, the government guidance. Okay. And so I'm going to turn our attention a little bit to some of the detail now. I mean, one of the good things about rowing is once boats are on the water, they tend to be quite socially distanced because of the blades sticking out of them. But Jeff, on the land, what sort of things might you be thinking about in terms of kind of your event operations?
There isn't a one-size-fits-all answer to that, Rich, because every site will vary on their individual constraints. But what I would suggest is that you want to be looking at your pinch points, particularly if you're moving larger boats about. Even singles are relatively long if you compare them to the size of an average car. So most sites tend to have pinch points getting on and off the water. So up in Newcastle, for instance, you know, all of the landing areas are accessed by flights of stairs. That's quite common around the country. Carrying boats up and down flights of stairs, particularly if you're coming off the water when you've been racing and you're tired, can be a potential issue. We've already talked about helping single scullers off the water. So if you can't regulate how fast they all finish, you get a lot of people coming off the water at once in a constricted area. To get them away, that needs management. Another potential constricted area is a lot of competitions are short of room for parking the trailers and rigging the boats. So in normal circumstances, you're trying to get as many boats and trailers in a small area as you can. With the COVID situation at the moment, you obviously need to look at your spacing, and while you're going to try and maximise what you can fit in, you also need to be COVID secure as well. So that's another potential pinch point that you're going to have to look at.
It seems to me, and Nick, perhaps you could jump in here, it seems to me from the guidance that a key principle as well is to get as much information out to people in advance as possible, because that avoids the need to kind of bring people together for briefings.
Yeah, I think that very much so. I mean, just touching on a couple of points that Jeff made at first, that about spacing, you know, we do need to go back and look at what space is available to us and actually be realistic about how many trailers or cars with boats on we can fit in. We need to look at maybe alternative parking arrangements. You know, we all know the world ain't the normal that we knew it was a year ago. So it may well be that we need to look at off-site parking. And a lot of events do it now, but you know, they're giving crews boating times, or maybe grouping crews together. That's something that I think was invaluable up in Newcastle for that event. The boating was really well organised because crews were given times. You know, that is really something that every event, I would say, ought to be looking at.
And Kat, just elaborating on that point, I guess in some ways it adds complication, but in other ways, in this current situation, it's quite lucky that your competition operates almost out of 3 sites with the 3 different boat clubs there. How did you sort of manage those 3 sites?
So we're very lucky to have 3 sites. I mean, even in normal circumstances, we try and use the 3 sites just because for ease of boating. But especially this year, it just gave us so much extra space on land, and it enabled us to spread people out while they were rigging. And then also to, as Nick alluded to, kind of give people boating times in set kind of spacing. So we could really almost exaggerate the gaps between competitors having to get hands on and then get on the water, which just really minimise the crossover people on the pinch points that Jeff mentioned and the steps, kind of taking their blades down, all those areas where there might have been a crossover of people. Because we had 3 sites to use, we could then spread people about, really take our time and not necessarily rush things like we might have in the past, just to get people on the water. And then also by using 3 sites, we've used 3 clubs and been able to collaborate between the 3 of us and come up with a plan together. And the more information you could put together from each site and from each club to then send out to the competitors, I think it was really useful to be able to do it that way.
Brilliant. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think the bit about the competitor instructions and really reiterating to people that the messaging that goes out has to be, you know, this is different. Please read this stuff. It's for your own benefit and your own good. Really does work. And what worked really well with the Tyne event was that short video going out as to what was sort of expected. I think if you can do a 2-minute video of a quick maybe walk around what's different around the site. I'm sure there's every club, every event has got some juniors that could probably use that technology to do it. Couple of minutes people will watch, give them 10 or 12 pages of instructions, they'll probably skip read them.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of one of the things that I would say from my experience of working on this guidance is we don't need to just look to rowing. Like, I mean, that video is very similar to lots of videos you'd see from hospitality venues and others. And I think as a sport, we can look outside of the sport for that inspiration, how best to deliver those instructions. And we certainly find on the British Rowing channels, anything with video on definitely gets picked up more. And if you do want to see that instructions video, it's available on the Newcastle University Rowing Facebook, I think, and I think we shared it on the British Rowing channels, and we'll put a link into with the recording of this tomorrow. Thank you very much, by the way, to everyone who's sending in their questions. We are trying to drop them in as we go through, so do keep them coming in. Phil, the next one, I mean, this connects into kind of those on-land operations again. It's an area which I know you've got a lot of expertise in terms of timekeeping. Tend to be tucked away in quite small little huts and things like that. In the past, potentially not the easiest to social distance, but how would you advise people to sort of set up their timekeeping teams?
Obviously, I would recommend having sort of some sort of automated laptop or timing box type based system, because that makes life a lot easier for reducing the amount of paper that floats around. But also you can think about how you lay your teams out at the start and finish lines. You don't have to be all on top of each other. You can actually be separated out. And the rule, of course, is that you can do 1 meter with mitigations, which could be screens or face coverings or other methods. And also think of how you space them going back along a line. So you can get 2 meters apart with 3 people. You've got that for your timing team. That's only taking up about 4 meters, 1 at the front, 1 in the middle, 1 at the back, with 2 meter separations, or separated slightly sideways, because normally we're looking over a large stretch of water. So actually the differences won't be great. And also if everybody does the same every time, then the differences will be the same all the time, which can be taken out of the equation. I do have something with some paper using when I do my timings, just write down the crew order. They don't have to be on the finish line, they can be a bit further away. So really, it's just thinking about it thinking about it means you can just almost carry on the way you would normally do it, with a bit more separation, with a bit more social distancing involved.
Yeah, and it's a question here that's come in. It's related to the volunteers, and clearly one of the things that we all have to be really conscious of is the fact that we don't know necessarily the circumstances that our volunteers have had to deal with over the last few months. Maybe Kat, you're perhaps best to answer this, but did some of your potentially older or potentially more at-risk volunteers, did you find that generally people were pretty supportive, and how did you go about communicating with those groups?
Yeah, so I guess we were quite lucky in the first instance in that a lot of our volunteers were students from Newcastle University Boat Club, and a lot of them lived together, so they were already in their natural bubbles, and we could kind of keep them in their households in job roles. So we'd eliminated a lot of risks there. In terms of our volunteers that were maybe a little bit old or a bit more vulnerable, we made it quite clear at the beginning that if they didn't feel comfortable volunteering, if circumstances changed, then they are fully within their right to say, look, I don't want to help anymore, and that was fine. And the way we got around maybe having a shortfall was just that we had a huge long list of people who were potentially willing to help, and then almost like a substitution system. If someone didn't think they could make it, or their situation had changed, they'd become unwell, or they felt uncomfortable, then we had someone else to step into the role. And I think, again, that ties into planning early, making sure you've spoken to the right people early, so that you can actually put those measures in place. So you're not, as in, we could have easily been in a position where 2 days out from competition, we're thinking, oh goodness, the restrictions have changed and we've now got no umpires. But thankfully, we had already kind of factored in that as a potential situation way back when we started planning. So we could just say, okay, these 2 people aren't coming, so let's invite the next 2 and kind of work around it that way.
Excellent. Cool. And going on to another volunteer, well, potentially a volunteer, potentially sort of a cross between some paid support here, Nick. One area on the water where there could be closer contact is around rescue launches. What's the current recommendation from us and guidance from us around that?
So what has worked really well, what worked well up in Newcastle, was that the safety providers actually buddied up as households, And I think we do see that when we've been talking to people like Northern Exposure and people like that, that's how they're looking at crewing boats. Our guidance is basically, it's 2 meters, but with mitigation. So maybe look to you if you can use bigger rescue craft than often we see at rowing events. That's maybe one way. You've got somebody that's driving, you probably can be 2 meters away with the second person, the other crew member, in the bows of the boat, for instance. The guidance recommends wearing PPE all of the time, and that is really so that you're not having to don PPE when you arrive at a rescue. That's the whole bit about it. What was really, really good, and sorry, the guidance does say as well, you need to make sure that there's a face covering or a visor in the safety launch for any casualty. And what was really, really good up in Newcastle was that each launch had got a COVID PPE box in there that was labelled up so that it kept everything dry and ready to go and aid a rescue.
Cool. And Kat, did you find generally the guys who were supplying your safety cover were really well set up for this?
Yeah, so we use Red Seal, which is a charity, but they provide safety cover for our event and most of the events on the Tyne. And in speaking to them, they provided their own PPE. We offered to give them a COVID box, as Nick was describing before, but they actually had their own measures in place, and we married up our risk assessments and they both matched, so they provided all of that stuff themselves.
Brilliant.
And Rich, I think just what's key to this around safety is that we all often go to events and see the same either volunteers or suppliers there. There's no reason why we shouldn't still all be doing that, but just in a COVID secure way. But we just need to make sure that we're asking the right questions of those suppliers so that they're not putting themselves at risk. And as Kat has alluded to several times tonight, it's about timing, it's about doing things perhaps a little further out than we would normally do with an event, just in case something happens and we need to look for alternative crew.
Yeah. And Nick, I was going to come to you next actually with a question around really the land around an event. So clearly quite a lot of competitions have areas which are open to the public, and quite often in normal circumstances spectators would probably gather there. How would you recommend the competitions approach that?
Yeah, I mean, there has been a lot of talk and a lot of discussion, and rightly so, about what land and event controls and about what to do about spectators. Our guidance is around dissuading spectators wherever possible, and we've tried to split into the guidance, and this is genuinely thanks to some other colleagues, some other rowing colleagues out there, into different areas. So if you look at the guidance, it mentions about sort of competition zones, and whilst we're perhaps using public areas, I don't think it's necessarily unrealistic to try and cordon off, say, a boating area that is for boats, crew, for rigging, and to try and put a few better controls around those areas, so that we're trying to keep it as secure as we can. In those areas, we should be making sure that people have either registered through the event administration system or through an event QR code, so that we know who's been about. But I struggle to think about any watercourse in the country that hasn't got a public right of way, either by it, near it, on it. And all our advice can be is that if you've got pieces of land like that, you can't be expected to keep control of them. You can't be expected to keep people's details, contact details for test and trace, for people just walking from one village to another on a public towpath. Similarly, if competitors or their support staff wander off along those areas, there's nothing realistically you can do about it. But the key is just simply in all messaging is to try and dissuade spectators from coming.
And Julian, I know when we were talking earlier, you were saying that this was an area that was probably one of the things you were a little bit worried about, but it sounded like it actually went okay on the day itself.
Yeah, definitely. Like the evening before, the morning, that was my worry, because on both sides of the river, in front of all the boathouses and boating areas, there are some very public footpaths that a lot of people do use on a normal day. And during normal events in the Tyne, those banks would be pretty busy with spectators. But yeah, in the end, it was fine. I think going back to making information very clear before the event happens, I think we did say in our instructions, like, please, no spectators. And yeah, people adhered to that. I think it also, in a way, did help that we were entering a local lockdown at the time, because it meant less people were out and about, and people could see that there was a serious event going on with everyone wearing face coverings and being very careful. So I think people took notice of that and didn't really stick around. So yeah, in the end, it ran very smoothly, and it wasn't an issue in the end.
Cool.
Also,
I should probably just sorry, go on, Phil.
Because also, because it's worth noting that when Newcastle went into the local lockdown, that the local council were very pleased and happy with the pre-documentation about no spectators to allow the competition to carry on. I think that shows actually that the local councils were willing it to go on.
Yeah, and that's reassuring to see. And for those of you who might not have seen the version 7 of the guidance launched yesterday, that we have actually elaborated the information about kind of those areas around the event and how to deal with spectators. So there's a lot more guidance than the last version in there now. So I mean, talking about, I guess, different areas of the competition, I guess there's particular areas where there's going to be more people passing through. How did you go about putting in place cleaning protocols for your competition?
Yeah, so obviously, as you say, like entrance points to any of the clubhouses or to the toilets are big high flow areas where we were wary about making sure the right cleaning processes were in place. We had hand sanitizing stations at all of these points, and also disinfectant spray, anti-bac spray at all the different handles and doors that competitors might be going through quite regularly. And we'd expect them to clean them, but we also set aside volunteers, or kind of every so often, I think it was hourly, we had them going in and clean it fully themselves, just to make sure that if competitors had forgotten or had not maybe done as thorough a job as we were hoping for, that we had someone who was kind of making sure it was being done properly regularly. So yeah, that was mainly kind of entrances to boathouses, toilets, and any points where they might come into contact with like the entrance desks or other competitors, that sort of thing. And then just make sure there's plenty of provisions around and signposted for people to use.
Yeah, and Nick, I noticed one of the changes we made to the advice yesterday was just to reiterate a bit of a reminder for crews to bring things to clean some of their own equipment as well.
Yeah, just going back to Kat's points, I mean, you also had volunteer marshals, didn't you, outside the buildings, certainly where I was at Tyne United, controlling the number of people going into the loos and into the building, which I think was really good, of just giving some polite, simple instruction really to people, just to remind everybody, which was great. Yeah, I mean, what we have said is that in the latest guidance is sort of around any boat sharing, is that if clubs are going to boat share, they need to be thinking about mimicking the same cleaning protocols that they have in their club when a boat shared. So they would need to bring assuming an event, assuming it's unrealistic for an event to put on lots of cleaning materials, we're recommending that each individual club would bring their own cleaning materials for where shared boats are, to clean boats down. But I mean, again, you know, we saw it at the Tyne event. There are a couple of trailers with boats on. People came, they rigged the boats, they went off, they raced, they came in, they washed their boats down before tying them onto the trailers, and then, you know, they were following good hygiene practices. And that's all we need to do, and just to remind people of that.
And Nick, I know this is a particular love of yours, but talking of those volunteer marshals reminded me of the conversation we had the other day about there can never be enough signage at an event.
Yeah, I do like signage at events, but I think that it acts as good reminders to people. You know, I think we all do it, and we probably all walk by the same door or the same notice board every day, and we just don't look at it. So if we've got clear, concise signage that, you know, is in your face just to remind people, I think it helps focus people's minds. And we just need, this is something that's key to getting out to competitors and their support staff, that, you know, we're all trying to put these events on in fairly confined and safety restricted times, and we're trying to do it for them. And you know, what we saw up at Newcastle, everybody fully respected that. And I think, you know, we're in a sport that has a damn good community spirit, and I think they will all work together and follow us.
So I just wanted, looking at the questions coming in, I just wanted to talk a little bit about crews themselves and how you try and avoid too much mixing, I guess, of people. Kat, you guys, I think, asked people not to double up.
Yeah, that's right. We took the decision to ask competitors just to enter one division at a time. Mainly, that was so that we could almost turn over a full division, completely evacuate all 3 sites, clean everything down, and then be ready to receive the next group of competitors. For us, the way that it works with the competition and the facilities we had available, we thought that was the best way to do it, to try and limit mingling, and also kind of touch back on the spectators point and the helpers, just reiterating the information beforehand that we wanted to have the fewest number of people on site as possible. If you needed assistance, could it just be 1, maximum 2 people to help you, and not, you know, the entire extended family come in to help and also maybe sneakily watch on the side. So yeah, it's a lot about just information given and then trying to work out what's best for your site. And for us, we thought that was let everyone race, make everyone go home, reset, and then go again for the next 2 divisions.
Jeff, I guess it kind of comes down to a risk assessment for each site, because I know there's certain other events at the moment that are looking at this same problem and treating it in a different way.
That's right. I mean, as you say, you need to look at your particular circumstances, look at your site. So up in Newcastle, for instance, we've already mentioned that they were lucky that they had 3 separate boathouse sites to spread over. Another way of looking at it that Weybridge, for instance, have done is try to encourage doubling up to try and limit the number of people on site that way. So, you know, each person that's there races several times. There can only fit so many people racing in a day. So if people's doubling up, that's less people on site in the day. So I'm not saying one's right or one's wrong. You need to look at your circumstances and see what works with your setup.
And Nick, one of the other questions we had coming in was around the mixing of masters, seniors and juniors, and particularly like coxes, potentially you might have a junior cox with a senior crew. Any different considerations to normal here, or is it more normal safeguarding?
I think it's as far as safeguarding goes, just because we've got COVID here, it doesn't relax anything around our safeguarding guidance and rules. And as far as events, competitions, before Phil tells me off, as far as competitions go, there's no difference around coxing as there is within a club setting. So where we've put in the guidance, you know, when we got back to coxed crew boats, around trying to form crew groups, that still very much stands for competition. So, you know, hopefully a cox forms part of one group and sticks with them. That's important that people remember that. You know, we're trying to get competition up and running for everybody to enjoy, but this isn't competition as normal.
Although I think your first point is really important to reiterate there, that like we need to remember that we start with our normal safety guidance and our normal safeguarding guidance, and then build the COVID guidance on top of that.
Yeah, definitely.
And Phil, it wouldn't be a webinar about competition if we didn't talk about SAS ranking index points. So as our resident expert on this, I'm going to come to you on a couple of questions here. The first one is, if an affiliated competition has to restrict its entry, are ranking points still awarded?
Rich, before I go to talk about this, to avoid it for a few moments, just to remind people about all the stuff you do in your club normally, you just bring to the competition. Just because you go to a competition doesn't mean you leave all your normal processes at home. So you come with the crews, your normal bubbles and everything else, and all the normal procedures you do. The competition is just do what you're doing at home at somebody else's venue. So you do need to remember to do all those things. But coming back to the question about ranking points, if it's an affiliated competition, then ranking points will be allocated as normal. Because although you may be restricting your entries a bit, most of the restrictions so far have actually still been a reasonable number of crews. Having said that, one thing which is a constant ongoing process with the whole SAS ranking point system is that we do continuously look at it and see whether anything needs to be tweaked in it to improve it on a continual improvement basis. And obviously this year, losing a year's of data doesn't help us, but also everybody's ranking points have gone back naturally and everybody's gone back the same way. So everybody's still in the same situation of not having any competition this year. With the old status points, though most people have forgotten them by now, you would have been at the same level regardless of what you've been doing over the last summer. So that's how the affiliated competition side will work. As for private matches, it's as normal for private matches that ranking points will not be given. And so at the moment, however, one part is, do you need to do your own entry system? Well, actually, you can request to use BROE, and all the usual BROE charges will then be put in place. And with private matches, you can charge for entries. It doesn't say you can't charge, so you can use BROE to charge. Because obviously you may incur costs. You may need to bring toilets in, even if it's a small number, or whatever facility you need to bring in. You still got to do your risk assessment safety. You may need safety boat cover and things like that. So you can still charge, but BROE is there to use if you wish.
Cool. I'm glad that we've obviously been working together enough over the last few days that you managed to pick up that second half of the question telepathically without me even asking it. Didn't give away that we've got them written down in front of us at all there.
So I also link affiliated competitions and private matches all the time because I get those questions asked. Can we? One good question get asked: can we convert an affiliated competition into a private match? Well, really, if you're running on the same day with just slightly restricted numbers, then it's still an affiliated competition. Running a private match is not reducing any of the responsibilities for doing COVID security assessments, risk assessments, safety assessments. It's not an easy let out, not to avoid doing a lot of paperwork. You should still be doing it. The rules of racing do say that. Yeah,
and I guess fundamentally, even at a club level, just intra-club competition, you still need to be thinking about all of those COVID secure protocols. Excellent. Yeah. So, Jeff, I'm going to come to you now on a question that we've had from quite a few different people actually. Clearly, in terms of finances, some of the extra measures, whether it's providing PPE or cleaning materials, they're going to cost a little bit more. If you were organising a competition in the next few months, how would you go about approaching that?
Yeah, this year is definitely different. I mean, traditionally with organising a competition, you look at what you spent last year and presume this year is going to be similar plus a little bit for inflation. This year, I'd strongly advise that you really go through it line by line, check, don't assume things are going to cost the same as last year. You know, we all know some things due to COVID might be in short supply, might put the prices up. You also need to think what you're actually going to need. So do you need more toilets, PPE that you were talking about, Rich? All of those need budgeting in. And as Nick said earlier, we really need to think about a capacity as well. You might not be able to fit in as many competitors. You know, to maintain social distancing, to get on the water might reduce the amount of crews you can put out in a fixed time slot. The amount of trailers you can fit in might be reduced. So you might be spending more money on the one hand, but having less competitors on the other hand. So you need to do your budget carefully, see if it's still financially viable to run. Also as well, competitors probably need to be realistic that costs are going to go up. If a competition's going to run, it is going to have extra costs. Competitions might be able to withstand some of that increase in cost, but some of it might have to be passed on to the competitors.
Cool. And I think probably one of the things with my marketing hat on, I would say as well, is don't be afraid to ask people. Many of the people in this webinar probably saw the survey that we put out about potential event that we're considering as British Rec. There's nothing wrong with doing that with your sort of clubs that would normally enter and going and asking that question. I mean, Kat, you've obviously been through this recently. How did you? Oh, sorry. Yeah.
If I could just come back on one thing as well. This is particularly on finances, but I think all things in general, and Kat said it already, you need to be really upfront. So you need to think about contingencies, you know, do we need to cancel, etc. Think about the financial implications and be clear when you advertise the competition that what is involved financially, what potential outcomes might be if there are extra COVID restrictions, if you do have to cancel. And so people know what they're letting themselves in for.
I think there's a good document out there, which is our competition checklist that we published last time round, which lists lots of things. It might seem to some that it's sort of teaching people to suck eggs, but what we're actually trying to do was a bit of a brain dump for people that need some help to look at how to check their event organisation, and that's out there on the website, and I think that would be really good for people to use as a check and balance.
And Kat, you've obviously been through this planning recently. How did you guys approach the kind of financial side of things?
I think just to echo Jeff, plan in advance. We looked at potential costs way before we even started to look to put the competition together. And again, start conversations early. So we were really lucky in that we went to the suppliers and said, this is the plan for the event, this is what we think we need from you. Are you able to provide it, and are you happy for us to pay you for it if the event goes ahead? And it may feel really cheeky, and I must admit I didn't like saying it that way, but I think people understand that everyone's in this uncertain time at the minute where you just don't know what's going to happen, so everyone's a bit nervy committing to paying for something that you might not then end up using. Thankfully, obviously we did, but it was good to have that conversation and make sure that everyone's on the same page. And what we found was that all the suppliers were really keen to help because they're desperate to do things as well. They want to get people out racing, they want to get back to normal as much as possible. So as much as it might feel a bit awkward having those conversations, I would strongly recommend doing it and planning way in advance. We were quite lucky in that we didn't have to increase our seat charge. We didn't run any food, so we didn't get any income from that, but there was no cost from that either. So yeah, it's all just about looking at everything in context, weighing up where money might come in, where it's definitely going to go out, and then figuring out from there what's going to work best for your competition and who you need to speak to early.
And I guess to a certain extent, competitions all need to make a judgment call. I know that some will be important fundraisers for clubs, whereas others may want to just go ahead just to give the competitive experience. So I guess there's that balance of almost a risk assessment there in the same way as you would do around other things.
Yeah, definitely.
Julian, I was going to come to you. One question that we've had in around face coverings. We've talked a lot about them today. How did you set out like your guidance around face coverings? Like were people required to wear them at all times on land, or how did you break that down?
So yeah, I mean, obviously, no, you have to have them inside, and I think obviously sometimes outside. I'm still confused sometimes by the guidance that's out at the moment right now, not necessarily when we race, but yeah, we want to be whiter than white at the event and as safe as possible. So we did require them to be worn outside all the time, definitely by volunteers and coaches. It's obviously not as practical for the athletes. So when they were carrying their boats down, launching, coming back off the water, they didn't have to wear one. But we had volunteers there making sure that crews were spaced out adequately in line. And as we said earlier, with the boating times that we gave to the crews, there wasn't a big line of crews waiting to go anyway. And then since we were launching off steps, we told them which step to go on the sheet with the boating time, and on each step only one competitor at one time. So say if a competitor had taken their, I know I'm drifting from the topic of face coverings, but I think it's related. If they'd say brought their boat up, they couldn't then, and left their oars down there, they couldn't go and get their oars straight away. They'd have to wait for that next person who came in to completely get out of there. So yeah, volunteers, umpires, all that stuff. Yeah, people in launches wearing them all the time. Competitors, no, because it's not as practical. But when they're walking around the site, not, with their boat, then yes. But then when they weren't wearing a face covering, then we had precautions in place so they didn't have to.
Cool.
That was very convoluted, but yeah, I got there in the end.
No, it's useful, and I'm sure people are just grateful to kind of hear how you guys approached it. And one of the things I should probably highlight is that we've linked through to from the latest guidance to the Tyne Single Scullers Head website, where all the competitor instructions and other documentation are still available if people want to take a look and see how you guys approached it. And Nick, to that point, one of the questions we've had in was highlighting the fact, that whilst Tyne has these 3 different boating sites, a lot of competitions won't have that. They'll have potentially even just a single landing stage. I guess it's all about just taking the same principles and applying them and building the capacity.
Yeah, very much so. It's work out what you can do in these current times, really. So and don't be scared to think outside the box for different ways of doing things. We all, I guess, fall into what we did last year, and that's the norm. We need to think about what the new norm is now, but it shouldn't be daunting.
Brilliant. I just want to say a massive thank you to all of our panel tonight, to Kat and Julian. You guys obviously have just finished delivering an event, and probably we're quite looking forward to a break, and then we throw you onto a webinar as well. To Phil, Jeff and Nick as well, thank you very much for your time this evening. I think we've got through most of the questions, but if you do still have questions after that, then there's still the email address available to send questions in, where we'll look at them and try and give advice. Equally, if you've got any feedback on the guidance, it's there to try and help you as clubs and competitions. So please do share that feedback. We'd really like to hear it, and we want to make that the most useful document it can be for you. I hope you found this really useful, and yeah, thanks very much for your time this evening.
I think, Rich, one comment is to say, be positive. Let's see what you can do.
Yeah, thanks so much.